Yeah, what's interesting is there more and more jobs are being monitored, not necessarily with cameras, but efficiency stuff, to where the pressure is incredible and people are expected to multitask. And I may bring it up again later. You can talk to brain people if you want, but it's a myth, it's a fable. What you're doing is you're switching back and forth really quick, and the illusion is. And I thought, I can read and watch TV and do my homework and all that stuff all at the same time. What you're doing is you're switching back and forth really, really quick. In a computer term, it's called thrashing. You're not really focused on any of it, and there's a split second of thought lost every time you go back and forth. We are not designed for it, and as a result, we don't do as good a job. But that's hard to fight that when your own job is pushing you to be that. Right, we're going to talk tomorrow about how the current generation is, in fact, it was so ironic. On the way here, I sat next to a guy on the flight, and we got into this conversation, and he was this IT guy for Sprint, I think, and he was coming back from San Francisco, and he was talking about how in his job, they're talking about the death of the voice, that more and more people are not wanting to have an actual conversation, which is kind of interesting, and there's some other things that he said I may have time to share later. So we're gonna talk about one of the most beloved members of the family right now, and it's the television. And when it was first invented, you probably know, it's almost kind of this kind of stereotype, say, well, it's going to rot your brain, and watch out for that and everything. But nobody's asking the question anymore because it's become so part of our lives, we don't even notice it anymore, and it's changing. Television, the way it used to be, is not the same anymore, but. Nobody's asking about television anymore, not because the issues have been resolved, it's because it's like asking, what are you going to do about your ears? It's just not even relevant anymore to even ask the question. The statistics don't surprise you. 99% of Americans have a TV. Then when I read that, I thought, what's the 1% doing? The average set's on 55 hours a week. Yeah, I don't know. When you walk into a hotel room, what's the first thing you do? You need that voice. It's almost kind of a comfort thing to have the TV on. But I'm going to suggest some things that are obvious, probably obvious to you, maybe some things you haven't considered. And again, at the end of this, we're not going to say, everybody go home and throw away your television. That would probably be a mistake. I've met children who grew up in a house without television, and when they saw one, they became this leech that attached to the screen. They're obsessed with seeing it. So, depends on the family. I've met families who have survived without one, believe it or not. They're around there. But you've probably heard this before, that television affects our attention span. And what would be really funny is if right now you're not hearing what I'm saying because you're done listening. But our attention span, they've done studies that we about pay attention between 15 and 20 minutes, and that's about the distance between commercials. Writing for television is very formulaic. They have to have it mapped out according to the advertisers. So that's one thing. It's probably no surprise at all. One thing that kind of startled me, one person said, one of the problems with television, is it's kind of a strange way to put it, but it tells secrets. And what they meant by that is the line between childhood and being an adult is being blurred more and more. Children are finding out things they should not know, except through the filter of the parents. When it comes on, it says parental guidance suggested. That doesn't do anything. If anything, that makes them say, okay, I really want to watch it now. That's all that's going on there. Do you really think it's pretty, I assume there's maybe some, but do you really think they went to their parents and say, it suggests parental guidance. Do you guide me to watch this? Or, there's no consideration in that regard. It was put this way, without secrets, there can be no childhood. It's slowly learning about the world. Look at Ephesians 5. Look at a couple of verses in this chapter. And of course, At an early age, children are seeing things that they shouldn't see. We're not even talking about the internet yet. We're just talking about television. Ephesians 5:12 says that it is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. And the television does a lot more than mention. You've seen, if you've lived long enough, you've seen the trend. Every show is all about innuendos. That's how they get their ratings. And even as they're presenting, some of the criminal shows will present stuff as bad. It's done in such a way to draw people in because they need the ratings to go up. The number one job of any television effort is to keep you from changing the channel and to keep you watching. You'll notice that one show begins before the last show has even finished its breath. You notice the commercials, that last commercial is there, but then they got that little extra thing at the end of the show, and then they pick up with the next one. They want you to not turn it off because they know that most of us do not have the mental stamina to pick up that remote and hit the off button. Just so you know. Look at Ephesians 5:3. In fact, if somebody would read this for us, this is very relevant what we're talking about. Who's got Ephesians 5 and verse 3? Okay, Chuck. So it's saying not even a hint of these things should be mentioned, and yet, television is there. It's there all the time. We've kind of lost the ability to blush. In fact, it's talked about in Jeremiah. If you want to look at this, Jeremiah 6:15. Blushing is a good thing. To feel shame, that means that you sense that something is wrong. And I think it's very significant that God focuses on our ability to blush in Jeremiah 6:15. But that ability is kind of being undermined. One of the things, through television. Children and adults are not fazed at all, are embarrassed by anything. Jeremiah 6:15. Who has that one? Would like to read it. Jeremiah 6:15. Great. So you notice the ability to blush. They don't even know how to blush anymore. I wonder the subtle things that are going on in television that can be a part of it. You notice how it's presented on television too, is that children are not much different than adults. And adults are treated as fools, especially the dad. You watch the average show, he's presented as a fool. And these are lessons that are being taught. And maybe there's something to be said for a family that sits there and watches the show and discuss it. So you notice that? And that's something how they're presenting the dad as the fool. That may be an option. You just need to be aware of it. You know what I recommend to people? Watch TV, but watch TV. Really be aware. One of the weirdest things on TV that nobody's aware of anymore is the laugh track. You know that's not real, right? MASH was a fun show. Don't you find it kind of strange in the middle of Korea, there's people laughing in the background? You remember that show? And there'd be jokes, and who's laughing? Where is that coming from? They record it, and you know why a lot of shows today have it? It's canned laughter. Sometimes it's called that. It's because the writing's not that funny. And so they're telling you when to laugh. Can you imagine if they had people crying in the background in movies to kind of urge you to, okay, this is where you feel sad. You just need to be kind of aware of how this machine works and to be completely aware. Now, of course, they filmed it in live studio audiences, but the laughter is not in sync with what's going on the stage. They shape that very specifically. So that's one thing. You probably know the verse, 1 Corinthians 5:14, remove the wicked man. If television was a person, you would have kicked it out of the house a long time ago. So if anything, have a little more control over it and maybe teach your family to have control over it. And maybe we tend to just kind of let it just run. And they know, the television people know that you will not turn it off. It goes into the next thing, and that's how it works. One other thing, and I know this sounds kind of doomsday-ish, especially with these strong words, but as a teacher, I have to spell correctly. It kills creativity. I have a friend who has 6 kids, and you probably have, families who have even more, and he noticed something, and he had done some reading, and you've probably seen it, little kids. When kids get bored, guess what happens? Their imagination kicks in. A stick becomes a car. a carrot becomes, a gun, and this becomes a doll, and the world's wide open for them. What typically happens is when the boredom level kicks in and creativity is about to start, you turn on a machine that's creative for you, and it shuts it down. I mourn the loss of all the people that could have played an instrument or learned something and developed some kind of talent, except for the fact that the screen did it all for them. And again, it doesn't mean go throw away your TV or Xbox. I have an Xbox 360. I'll go on record. I have one. I own one. But if that's, if it's hours and hours consuming your creativity, I really believe God designed all of us to be creative. It's not a fluke for specific people. Oh, that's a creative person. Everybody's creative if you develop it. But we are surrounded by flashing bells and whistles that kind of suck that out of you because it's being creative for you. But that's one thing they've noticed in younger people is the idea of the boredom, which would have led to skills, is switched off because we're dazzled all the time by the next show. I'm going to pause, see if anybody has any comments. We'll keep going. This is something that kind of is of kind of concern to me because I noticed it in myself. It shapes what we laugh at, our sense of humor. I mentioned the laugh tracks. I don't know if you've ever discovered this about yourself. You're watching a show and something's said and you're laughing and it crosses my mind, wait a second, that's wrong. God directly condemns that. That's offensive to my Father. And I'm laughing. I had a teacher said to me once, if they can get you to laugh at it, they're one step closer to getting you to accept it. And you really watch TV, and you'll find yourself, you'll notice it. Wait a second, that's condemned. That's wrong. That's going to cost somebody their soul. The fact that they're living together. I saw this recently. I was at somebody's house. Happened to have the Disney Channel on for whatever that's worth, and it was a kids show. And there was a younger girl talking to an older woman, and the older woman had met a guy and was nervous about the relationship. And the little girl, she was about 6 or 7, it was very subtle. She brought her over to her playhouse to be the wise one and straighten out this older woman and said, nothing to worry about. It's not like he asked you to move in with him, and then they just went on. La-di-da, nothing. She just implied that they were going to live together, and that's okay. That's a sin. But it's so subtle, and we laugh, ha, 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 and not really recognize it. I think that can be one of the serious side effects of our entertainment world. One other thing. Television. Well, let me tell you this before I write it down. My mom has an incredible ability to walk in and interrupt at the climactic point of the TV show. I don't know what it is. It's incredible. I'm serious. Amazing number of times we're like, okay, it would be the equivalent of, Luke, I've got something to tell you. And she would walk in. It's like, no, what do you, would be really, and I remember growing up and it was really irritating. And one day, finally, it hit me that I had it backwards. Mom was interfering with television. Television interferes with life. Here's a stupid show I'm going to remember a year from now, and I'm irritated with this actual person who raised me coming in to tell me it's time for dinner. It's the other way around. Television interferes. I do want you to know this. I have very good memories of sitting with my family and watching shows together and laughing. And I know, the answer is not to throw it all away. There's some good things that can happen sharing a movie together. But we need to be aware that a lot of times it does interfere. Okay. There's a couple other things I want to mention about this. Anything else about TV that you want to point out? Maybe you've observed in yourself or how it's changing? Maybe we'll kind of save it for the end, but I want to pause every once in a while just in case. I was just reading a book about that very idea. There's talk about the female brain and the male brain. One was a little bit longer than the other, but I won't say which one. They were talking about how boys she was raising her son and say, I'm going to try to keep him from being violent because they're blaming the system and things like that. And so she got him, this is a secular professor, so she got him a Barbie doll, her son, to kind of balance things out. And he grabbed the Barbie doll and went bang, 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 using the legs, So yeah, there's some interesting things in that regard. One thing, and we can't lay it all at the feet of television, but here's something that's important to consider. We're kind of headed towards shallow thinking. There's concrete thinking and abstract thinking, and this has nothing to do with intelligence or being dumb or smart or whatever. Concrete thinking is like something concrete is like money. Something abstract is integrity. I can show you money. Integrity is kind of a little bit, it's a higher level of thinking, and it's more difficult. It's not based on images. You might notice that in the Old Testament, God said, I don't want you to make an image of me. It wasn't just about making images of false gods. He said, I don't want you to make an image of me, because it was a degradation. It says your thinking has to be on an abstract level. You're not going to picture anything. I don't want that. And to make an image of him was a degradation. Part of that is because it's lesser thinking. Not stupid, but lesser thinking. A culture that is trained to think in images is trapped in shallow thinking. When you hear the name Einstein or Lincoln, you picture them. You don't think about their thoughts. That's one of the first symptoms of a culture that's nurtured on images, is we always picture stuff. We even see it in kids' books. You notice how books, as they get more mature, have less pictures. We even say, hey, do I have to draw a picture for you? That's because abstract thinking is higher thinking. And so that's kind of significant to us if television is teaching us. You remember, we even say seeing is believing. Well, apparently Jesus didn't believe that, because he told Thomas, you're more blessed if you don't see. It can't just be about the visual stimulation. In fact, 2 Corinthians 4:18, it's worth taking a quick look at this. We'll look at a couple of verses. 2 Corinthians 4:18. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen, for the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. And very briefly, in Ephesians 6, it says our struggle is not against flesh and blood. The whole battle is abstract. And if we are crippled by this culture into being locked into a concrete level, we're really going to have a hard time grasping that. Something else we need to talk about is TV has taught us to be always expecting to be amused. We determine things on whether or not they are amusing to us. You talk to the average person and say, what'd you think? Say, oh, that was boring. And that's kind of the standard.
One of the things my students complain about a lot is bored.
Yeah, I heard somebody say only boring people get bored. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's kind of a slam. But you see it in worship towards God. It's not about whether or not God's pleased, it's whether or not the people are amused. And that's not what the Bible describes. Whether or not you're amused or not is irrelevant. But we're trained by our culture and possibly TV along those lines. It's kind of startling to realize the real purpose of parables. We're going to take a moment to look at this. Matthew 13:10. Now, Jesus told parables, of course, to use familiar things to help people learn, but there was more to it than that. And it's kind of startling when you realize the real purpose of parables. They even ask him in Matthew 13:10, why do you speak to them in parables? And by the way, he always used parables. Always. Every time he spoke, there was a parable. It says that. Matthew 13:13. This is what he says. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because while seeing, they do not see. And while hearing, they do not hear, nor do they understand. And then jump down to Matthew 13, about 14 through 16. It says, this people has become dull. The parables was to separate the men from the boys. Because you'll notice in Matthew 13:36, remember the parable of the soils. He gives the parable, and then everybody leaves after part 1. The disciples stay, and they get part 2. The part 1 people walked away with the shallow version. That's all they got. Because Jesus wanted to know who was really wanting to know the truth. The parables weren't about just holding their hand and trying to make it easy. It was to separate the men from the boys. And that's what was going on every time he told. It wasn't about sugarcoating the truth. Sometimes we go to great lengths to say, please let me make the truth more palatable for you, or maybe spin it in such a way that's not offensive to you. That's not how it was done. Many people left after Jesus said things, and he did not chase them down and try to make it easier for them. He tried to find out who was really looking for the truth and who wasn't. It doesn't mean you set out to make things difficult or that you try to be boring or anything like that, but trying to meet the expectations of the people is often a mistake. Back in the first couple of centuries, there was this guy who wrote this concerning the people of the time. The people who once upon a time handed out military command, high civil office, legions, everything, now restrains itself and anxiously hopes for just two things: bread and circuses. This formula offered a variety of pleasures such as this: the distribution of food, public baths, gladiators, exotic animals, chariot races, sports competitions, and theater representation. It was an efficient instrument in the hands of the emperors to keep the population peaceful. Basically, it's saying this: the people will leave you alone and let you do whatever you want as long as you give them food and entertainment. Bread and circuses. Give them that, and they'll stop thinking. And you can pretty much run the show. TV is kind of our own private circus. And a lot of religious groups nowadays are playing off that idea. It's all about the show. And people in great numbers will be drawn to that. And we are possibly considering the fact that we need to be amused all the time. I'll share this with you really quick. Another word besides meditation, in the Bible, by the way, is very clear that we're to meditate, to think deeply on Scripture. It's not an Eastern religion invention. God invented it. Theirs is more about emptying your mind. The original version is about filling your mind with the word, dwell deeply, to have it richly dwell in you. And one of the words that means think or to meditate is to muse on something. Not the band, but the word. You know that somebody who believes in God is a theist. Somebody who doesn't believe in God is an atheist. You do the math. It's the opposite of thinking. And just because you are amused or not bored, that does not mean you're dumb. It just means that it's not necessarily the highest level of clarity. And if you expect to be amused all the time, then you are trapped in a lower existence. And so I'd really recommend that you don't walk in or towards God and say, okay, what have you got for me? Amuse me. Whether you're bored or not is irrelevant. And I'll say this, and I know there's young people present. We have a youth camp, and I was a young people once too. But nowadays there are great efforts. We are so afraid that young men and young women are going to get bored. And I've been to youth activities where there was a lot of commotion, but very little Scripture, if any at all. I would be insulted if I was a young man or a young woman. I know young men and young women who have risen above that cliche. And they are not there to be amused. They're there to step up. And I want to make sure that that's said. Okay. I'm going to pause here really quick. We got a little bit of time. Okay, we're doing pretty good. I just want to emphasize the meditation idea. Sometimes I find this, by the way, in my daily Bible reading, I get in a hurry because I have too much to do and I'm moving too fast. And I did my daily Bible reading. That's not meditation. Meditation is where you focus on a verse or a passage and you put it in your heart. It's something that's very intrusive and you make it part of you. It's food. It's food. And it's so vital that we do that. I think it's one of the keys. But we say, I don't have time, and that's kind of silly. You'll notice boredom is actually a kind of a modern invention, and you'll notice when people are in line, very, very few people, they call it the lost art of doing nothing. Very few people can do nothing. I'm not talking about being lazy or loitering or anything like that. I'm talking about just being with their thoughts. People are in line, playing Angry Birds or whatever, and it's constant. I find it myself too. I want you to know I'm seeing this in my own life. But boredom didn't last, wasn't around that long ago. Some people suggest, and I'm leaning more and more towards believing this too, we don't want to stop and do nothing because then we have to think. And we don't want to think because then we think about our lives. And then comes the inevitable conclusion, I'm going to die. It's really kind of that simple. This is how one guy put it. It's hard to think about the fact that we're going to die. It's unpleasant, so we constantly seek ways to distract ourselves from the awareness of our own mortality. Speed, with the sensory rush it gives, is one strategy for distraction. And I'm saying everybody's running around just trying to ignore it, but you think about it, if you spend your whole day, running from one thing to the next, not having read your Bible, not having prayed, and you do that from beginning to end, and you've kept kind of moving, and you do that the next day, and the next day, there's not that many days before that's how you spent your life. A Christian is well aware that he's going to die, but he's also well aware that he's going to live again and can face it head on. We cannot be the ones who are kind of, hidden in the smoke and all the bells and whistles and not thinking. We should be the ones that can stand it for a few seconds to not have a screen in front of us or to have a real conversation with somebody. Okay, we have a few minutes, and now I'm going to talk about your best friend, the internet. The stoning will commence shortly after 11 o'clock. You can sign. Like we were talking about, it's important to have a clear head. Of course, there's false teaching going on and shallow comprehension of the Word. A lot of people's knowledge of the Bible is pretty limited. This kind of captures the idea. There was remember that show, So Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? The guy, the question was, in the Bible, who had the coat of many colors? And he had to poll the audience to get the answer. And he squeaked by. The next question was, who's always after that wascally wabbit? He knew that one. On Jeopardy, I remember time, these are the geniuses. The question was, what's the third book of the Bible? None of them got it. None of them. And it's not just, known trivia about the Bible, but even knowing a little bit about the Bible is a huge deal. People carry their Bibles around and they'll swear on it and carry their bulletins in it and things like that, but to actually read it, I'm not sure about that. The internet, there's some of the more pretty blatant things that are dangerous. I think everybody's pretty aware of that. But some of the things that you'll notice is beginning to affect our other technology. Television now, because the internet is all about, there's not just a screen, there's links over here and this and this and this. It's all in one page. You know how it works. That's now, you've noticed that in television where they have the little blurbs kind of appear in the corner about the next show, little advertisement during the show, and then it comes out again. And then the scroll bar at the bottom of the news so you can multitask. That's all internet influence. Whether or not that's good or not, it does divide your attention. There has to be a conversation. What they're finding out more and more, and if we have time, I'll tell you a couple other things about what neurologists are discovering about our brains recently. It's pretty incredible how God's designed it. Our brain has to have a conversation with itself. If it learns something here and here, one of the ways that you upgrade in your brain, so to speak, is that you make connections, the ahas. The synapses kind of fire in different ways. You can't do that as well if you're jumping around to different things. And the internet, that's one of the side effects that they're finding is they asked, the big study was done, how do people read on the internet? And the answer was that they reach as they don't. Not really. They're finding out, they're calling us pancake people. We're spread wide and thin. We think on a shallow level. I can't help but think of Paul in Athens. You remember they called him a seed picker? You remember that? It was actually a bird that would kind of pick up shiny objects. And they said, what is a seed picker? This idle babbler is the term they use. And that's exactly what they were. A little bit of this and that, and it's kind of scattered all over the place, the next new thing. I'll go ahead and mention this. It's not in your book, I checked, but in some songbooks, because I've lately been kind of watching myself, and if you're like me, sometimes I'll sing a song and have no clue what I just sang. Because I was thinking about lunch or something, or worrying about stuff. I'm not here, and that's serious. I need to be here completely. But I noticed in one of the books, there's the song "Humble Yourself in the Sight of the Lord," and I'm not picking on the publisher or even the people who own the books, but it suddenly hit me. I was really trying to push myself, say, okay, pay attention to the words. And this is what it said, And you know that Amazing Grace fits just about every tune. And so they had done that with this book. And so in the book, the verse read this: Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Period. It's a fragment. I know, you're like, who cares, English teacher? But that's kind of like saying, that's like saying, the car that I use to drive to work every day, period. It's not a complete thought. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, period. That's in there too. It's like saying, when I get to work after going through rush hour, period. But nobody's saying, wait, where's the other part of it? Because we're not thinking. We're just mouthing the words of the song. It sounds kind of nitpicky, but it seemed kind of a red flag to me that all of us are just, singing the next thing without really being there. I don't know. But singing's meant to be something. They did a study in 2006, and as a teacher, this was kind of interest to me, and as a reader, because I really like to read. And they're finding out that the way that we're reading is changing now because of the internet. And again, I'm not saying go home and disconnect your internet. You just need to be aware. We used to read like this. We just go left to right, and that's how we do that. Depending on what country you're in, that can change. This is how you read. We don't do that much anymore. Now the modern reader reads in the shape of the letter F. Because the internet teaches us to skim. We're like, okay, got it. I'm done. What's the next thing? Okay, I pretty much got that one too. We're off to the next thing, and it's skimming the surface. That's one of the things that they've discovered recently. The average look at a web page is about 10 seconds, they're saying. Nothing wrong with browsing or skimming, but if skimming becomes our dominant form of reading and you apply that to the Bible or other things that are significant, and you end up skimming people and relationships and things like that, that can be an issue. James 1:21 and other verses like this, it says, receive the word implanted. In Colossians 3:16, let the word of Christ richly dwell within you. If you think that an occasional glance at Scripture every Sunday is going to suffice, you are fooled. You've been tricked. It's your food. Jesus said, man doesn't live by bread alone. Every word that proceeds from the mouth of God, that's your food. So if you think eating once a week is going to get you by, then I think you've been fooled. Okay, I'm going to say a couple more things, and then we'll see if you have anything to add, and we could talk about whatever you want. I have a couple other things that I wanted to share if we have time. I mentioned they're doing more studies about your brain, and they're actually finding out some things that are pretty amazing that we didn't know before. And by the way, one of the major misconceptions that technology has kind of encouraged us toward is to think that the brain is just a very fancy computer. That's one thing about technology, is we end up describing ourselves in comparison to the technology that we invented. We talk about like multitasking and things like that, and I need some downtime and interfacing with people. We use computer terms to describe us. But saying the computer is like, or saying that the brain is just a more complicated computer is like saying a light bulb is just or like a star is just a more complicated light bulb. There's no comparison. I know you've seen movies where they just kind of connect or anything. You talk to any legitimate neurologist, no comparison. We're not even close to anything along those lines. In 1956, they said it was just a matter of time before computers become smarter than humans. But one recent guy said, just a matter of getting the right programming. Computers have advanced at lightning speeds, yet remain dumb as stumps. They're dumb. One researcher said, as far as the brain, it's really exciting to do brain research, and two, we don't know anything about the brain. The more they find out, the less they realize that they've understood. So here's what they've discovered new. It's called, you won't know you probably wouldn't know if I misspell it. That's the pressure if people find out you're a teacher. Everybody expects you to spell perfectly. Okay, I think this is right. Neuroplasticity. They used to believe that when you hit about 20 or 30, your neurons, your synapses, those gaps and all the nerve cells in your brain pretty much settled in and you're done. Try learning French at 45. No way. It's just so hard. They're finding out that's not the case at all. You remain, now it is, for a 5-year-old it's much easier, But they're finding out more and more. It's called neuroplasticity, and it goes back to the same thing as use it or lose it. The more you at any age do things and think things, it can continue. We're not talking smarts. We're just talking your ability to make new connections. That's always in place your whole life. And they used to think that that came to an end. This guy says, our ways of thinking, perceiving, and acting we now know are not entirely determined by our genes, nor are they entirely determined by our childhood experiences. We change them through the way we live. That doesn't sound familiar. These are the neurologists that are finally catching up with a lot of things that Jesus has taught and that God is trying to get across to us. I think of Romans 12:2. Would somebody read Romans 12 and verse 2? You've read this before, but maybe with all these things that we have in mind, it can shed some light here. Who's got Romans 12:2 and would like to read that? Okay, great.
And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove the will of God, what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect.
So notice that term, renewing your mind. I really believe that's one of the reasons why Christians get together, is to get a new mind. You need a new mind constantly. You need to renew your mind so that it's not conforming to the world. And that's supported. We are constantly trying to reshape our brains in the right direction. They did an experiment where they had two groups of people that never played the piano at all, and they taught them a simple tune. And one group, they said, and we want you to practice the melody 2 hours every day for 5 days. So for 5 days, for 2 hours, they'd sit there and play that little tune. The other group said, we want you to sit in front of the piano, but don't touch the piano. For 2 hours, I want you to just picture yourself playing that tune for 2 hours. At the end of the 5 days, they did a brain scan on these guys. There was no difference. Zero difference. They were indistinguishable. And I can't help but think of when Jesus, he said, before I said not to murder people, I don't even want you to hate people. We're going upstream to your brain. It's important how you think, let alone what you do. You remember before I said it was wrong to commit adultery? I don't even want it to cross your mind, because it's important what you think before it even takes place in your actions. But that's kind of good news. This neuroplasticity thing means you can still change your brain. But it also means that we can end up locked in our behaviors. It's much easier to just go default. There's another computer term where we just kind of get with our routines, and we don't like to change that much. And by the way, the opposite is true too, that if you kind of neglect certain things, your brain kind of, it's the use it or lose it kind of thing. The circuits kind of fade in that direction. So it's really important to focus our minds on the right thing. So just so you know, and again, I don't want to sound like a doomsdayer. TV's here, internet's here. We're not done. Keep in mind that hyperbolic curve. There are more things coming. And as always, there are things that we will never have predicted coming our way. So it's kind of be aware of what's going on. There's kind of a lot of movies, there's always the concern that machines will become self-aware. I don't know if you've heard that before. I don't think that's ever going to happen. The real issue is whether or not we ever will. To kind of, don't even talk about our machines, what about us? Are we ever really self-aware? I'm alive, I have a soul, I have a limited amount of time. What am I going to do with this time? I've got a couple other things, and this is about the time that we're supposed to start, but I want to give you the floor, so to speak. If there's anything you want to add to anything we've been talking about, and questions, I have a handy answer. It's I don't know, so yeah, feel free to ask any question. But I have some other things I'll share whatever time we have left. But like I say, I would love to hear your thoughts on any of this. We've been talking about a bunch of stuff like overload, our schedules, our stuff, and television and the internet. And I know that there's a lot of technology that you appreciate, and I do too, but there's probably some things too that you've seen you're kind of wary of, maybe in your own life or others. Is there anything you want to add before I keep blabbing? Great, Ryan?
Do you have a couple of examples of things you said we weren't expecting?
Yeah, great question. He's asking examples of, I said that for every leap forward technologically, there's always unexpected consequences. The car was one. When they invented the car, They thought, oh, it'll be a horseless buggy. It'll transport people. Nobody predicted traffic. Nobody predicted that drive-throughs. Nobody predicted that. Nobody predicted road rage. Another example of that surfaced in New York, I guess, recently. One of the classic ones that captures everything that we've been talking about, I saw a video of this guy and had ran into his car, and the video showed the guy getting out of his car. He yanked the door open and grabbed the phone out of her hand and spiked it into the asphalt. But one of the interesting things I found is that it affected families. Whereas before, families would eat dinner and then they'd spend the evening together. When people became portable, it was kind of a two-edged sword. We now get to go see family, because of transportation, but kids would leave. And they called them, a lot of the analysts and scientists say it became portable living rooms. And a lot of unfortunate decisions were made in cars that nobody predicted that, And you probably see it. I once worked with, you could almost kind of map it out. The young person would hang out, but once they got their license, that's when they started. It wasn't when they graduated. It's when they became portable, and they had the power to arrive or leave at their own discretion. That's one example. Transportation is kind of interesting as well. There was a big moral issue about trains when they were first invented because a lot of religious writers said God did not design us to move that fast, 35 miles an hour. That's how fast trains were. Scientists wrote about how we would suffocate, that our bones would be dissolved by the speeds, and there was a great concern about trains coming along the way. Transportation has shaped things in a lot of regard in that. I don't know if that's one example.
One of the things I had mentioned to you last night about the new life behavior curriculum that we teach in the prison system is that a lot of these individuals that I have privileged to teach, they don't know how they arrived at the behavior in which got them where they are.
Right.
Or developed the habits that they have. And so you get a lot of guys, for instance, they'll come to you and say, I didn't know this. Or, and it's a great opportunity, for people to understand that you can help people
Yeah.
find the reasons as to why they behave the way they do.
It's like turning on a light. You're providing the light for them.
I'm teaching anger management right now. And, a lot of the guys would just explode in anger when they were younger and didn't know why.
Well, and who would have thought, and I see it myself, that a car, because you get angry. I have my pet peeves about the way other people drive. There was a guy who said if they drive faster than you, they're a maniac. If they drive slower, they're an idiot. And we get angry. We get angry, and we think and say things that we'd never say if they were sitting across from us in a chair. That's an issue for a Christian. And I need to say this too, and this ties up what we mentioned before as far as transportation. A lot of people speed. It's against the law. It's against the law. And, many people say, I love my country, but then they speed. One person said it's the most common form of civil disobedience there is. Right, the anger, that's out of control. You made me think of, too, that kind of tagging with what you're saying and also what Ryan was mentioning, the clock. I didn't really have time to mention this, but I'll mention this as an example. It's just here. It was invented by monks a long time ago. I can give you more details if you want, but here's the short version. They invented it to devote time to God. It was a group of monks a long time ago. And the idea was like, okay, I'm going to spend an hour. They figured out, and we're going to divide up the day. Well, an hour for eating, an hour for prayer, an hour for scripture. It was all about God, was their idea. The secular world found out that they were doing it. That's a pretty good idea. So the business world started taking that into consideration. And it wasn't before long that the secular world, the royalty, had a clock, and all the monks had to submit to their schedule. It all turned around. What started out as a religious effort, the world grabbed it and turned it around, and now we have people, ironically enough, saying, why weren't you at church? Didn't have time. Didn't have time to read my Bible or pray. And basically what you're saying is after spending all these minutes that I divided up, I didn't have anything left for God. And another thing about the clock that's kind of interesting, so that's another example of how we didn't see a lot of things coming, but we've learned with the clock and other things, technology becomes prevalent, and then it becomes smaller and personal. Everybody has a camera in this room. Just everybody is equipped the equivalent of James Bond at this point. You realize that? All the devices you have, M has nothing on you. You're carrying all kinds of devices, and that's what happens as technology becomes prevalent and then invisible. It also consolidates. Your phone takes pictures. You realize how bizarre that is? Your phone takes pictures, among other things. And that's what happens as technology gets smaller and more portable and personal and does more things. Whether that's good or bad is debatable. One problem is it's the eggs in the basket thing. You know, if your phone, I don't know if you've left your phone behind, it's like leaving your kidney back home and you have to go back. You have to go back. Great.
The unfortunate part of it is that the world, you're almost forced into using technology.
Oh, yeah. Good luck.
I use my son as an example. He's here. He's an 8th grader. And our older children, they didn't get their cell phones until they started driving. And we didn't want Seth to have a cell phone because we didn't think he needed one. And we literally back and forth until the Sunday before school started.
Interesting.
We finally went and said, okay, we're going to do this. We bought the phone, and by the time we got home, we had an email from his music teacher saying, to the kids, everybody bring their phones tomorrow. So, I mean,
well, I think it's
even as
great.
a parent, when we felt that he didn't need that technology, guess what the school says or the world says? Actually, bring it to school tomorrow. You're going to need it. And so, as a parent, you're forced into having to go there, even if you feel that you don't need to go there at that time.
Yeah, I could get rid of my clock, not pay attention to the time. I could get rid of my car, but I'd have trouble functioning in the culture. I think it's great, by the way. I was talking that the youth group here gets text or push on Facebook to kind of keep all the parents posted and stuff like that. I think just a good example, there's pluses and minuses. But yeah, you're right. Let's say you decide today to say, yeah, I need to get rid of this. It's almost impossible to disconnect and without it causing a pileup because everybody's expecting it from you. Yeah.
Skip school, they steal from their employer, and in the end, it's all okay.
Yep. Ha ha ha. Yeah.
Never in trouble.
Yeah.
And the parents are dumb and clueless, and the mother is usually trying to relive her high school life.
Yeah.
And the dad is an idiot that doesn't understand anything, and they laugh as they pull one more on over their parents.
Yep.
And kids don't understand that that's not real.
Yeah. That's.
And then they get angry when they get grounded for something.
Yeah, what? Consequences? Yeah. No, you've touched on several things. One is that we, growing up in our world, we try to live our lives according to the movies and books and stories and all the amusements that we have, and then we're shocked that things aren't like that. But you said something else that made me think. But that's a great point, is that we, I know what you said, that it's typical for the mother, and I think parents in general, just older people, it's interesting that younger kids want to be teenagers. I'm not even really necessarily a fan of that word, by the way. That was invented, and I won't get off on that soapbox. It used to be you were a child, and then you were an adult. Now we got 7 years of bad luck, and, it's kind of... I'd be insulted if I was a young person. I'd say, you know what, I don't need this, little spot. Doesn't mean you don't need the encouragement of fellow young people, but again, kind of off the subject. But it's interesting, younger people want to be teenagers and older people want to be teenagers, and the marketing is played to that. The teenager, that word was invented after World War II by advertising people. It was all about advertising. And everything is built on that, tapping into the idea that you want to be younger and they want to be older, and it's all about them. We're actually going to talk about that generation tomorrow, some interesting things in the connection with technology. And they've got some insight as well as some issues as well. But what else? Does anybody else have anything they want to? Technology, here it is.
I'm a fan of technology.
Okay, good.
But the two things that everything goes from the entertainment industry, like you said, and we have 5 children, and from 24 to 13. And when you are trying to buy clothes for them, when you are trying to do anything, it is all filtered from the entertainment industry that you have no control over, if you will.
Yeah,
and
more
so,
and more, from what I understand, children's clothing looks more like adult clothing.
Yes.
That childhood, there's a book called The Disappearance of Childhood. It was written by a guy who wasn't even a believer, and he noticed that it's dwindling, that the innocence is being swept away. But anyway, you were saying.
Well, that's when you have to stand your ground, and
Exactly.
you buy their clothes, so you buy
Exactly.
what you think that they should wear. And as they get older, they'll learn to appreciate that. Not when they're 11, but when they get older, they appreciate it. But anyway, and the second thing is multitasking and going back to measuring your day by productivity. And that is the way I operate. And so, and I look at scheduling my day almost by scheduling backwards, putting the things in that I have to be there, and then going back, and then I can set my free time or my television time or anything like that. And technology has made that better.
Right. You've kind of taken it and reined it in and made it serve you.
Yes.
So instead of you being driven behind by technology, you're kind of using it for. So that's a great example of how it can be useful rather than a detriment. That's great. Yeah. So it's a show about a young guy and they. Oh, yeah. So it's what not to wear but for young people, right? Something like that? No, it's a comedy. So it's a comedy show about that, and so he's kind of resisting what she's making him wear, is that right? Is that what you're saying? Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Is that a reality show or a comedy show? Comedy show? Yeah, there's some interesting things that we kind of learn from television in that regard. That's great. Yeah, sorry. Good.
If you'll notice, I'm not using the microphone. When we're watching TV, and everybody, like on TV, families will have family time, and families will get outdoors and play sports, and they'll go to the park, and they're never watching TV.
That's interesting.
No one
I
on
never
TV
thought of it. You never see
no
people
one
on TV watching TV.
Watches TV.
We want to
And
watch
they're
people.
all way more connected.
That's kind of funny. I never thought of that. So people on TV don't watch TV. Yeah. People on TV don't watch TV for the most part.
I want to ask a question. Going back to something you said the first session about overload with trivial information and how that affects how we think or how we respond when we hear, pertinent information, real information. And this relates to social media, and I still don't know the answer to this. How should we use social media to spread the gospel? And my concern, and I see this on, by people are unbalanced, it seems, they want to start a debate on Facebook, for instance. Oh. And then everybody, they may even throw some verses in there. They state what they believe is the truth, and then, a lot of these people, I would agree, what they're saying is truth. But then the problem is you lose control of the debate because everybody from every crook of the world can start responding that's friends with those people. And then everybody's opinion seems as valid as the person who first said, this is the truth and here's the Bible basis behind it. But you lose control of the debate. And then it seems like, more false doctrine comes out of the attempt to try to defend the truth. How do we handle that?
Yeah, that's a great question. My first answer is I don't know. But it's funny you should mention this because we were just talking about this where I teach. The kids brought it up. Like one of the girls saw it on there and she felt guilty. Should I jump in? Should I not? And one of the things we talked about is what technology is doing now is it provides anonymity. And we say things that we would not say if we were face-to-face. the conclusion we reach is that it doesn't necessarily mean you can't say anything, but you might say, if somebody was saying, well, I don't believe in God or such and such, and you came in and said, well, what about this? And then they just lash out at you, then maybe it's like throwing pearls before swine and say, well, okay, I thought we were going to have a conversation, but yeah, a lot of the forums are vicious, and they're not there to listen. They're just there to lash out and say clever stuff and cut people down sometimes. My opinion is that it depends. It depends on who you're interacting with. If you have somebody genuinely searching, I think it could be a real opportunity. And to show you that I'm not anti-technology, I'm going to tell you a story. But does that kind of address your? That's a great question. But I want to give you an example, kind of along those lines. But I don't want to just fly by your question.
That's good. I like that.
Okay, maybe somebody else too. But my nephews, in fact, one of my nephews texted me last night. He was standing in line at GameStop in Arkansas at midnight. And that's what they do. They go for the game, release at midnight. They stand in line, and they go and they get the games. And this was Pokemon something. I don't know. Retro. Okay, yeah, it's bad. Okay, so my nephews, Isaac and Caleb, while they were still living in Denver, would play online. And if you've played online, what you do is you play other people in the world. It could be anywhere. It's international. It depends on the game. Like World of Warcraft, you had millions of players. And so I can't remember what game they were playing, but you can find the same people each time. And my nephews, when they would play, some guys would get on there and they have potty mouths, and they just kind of use language. And Isaac and Caleb would say, "Hey, we don't talk like that. We'd appreciate it if you don't." Some people would sign off. Others would be, "Oh, that's kind of cool." They met this guy named Thomas. And he thought that was pretty cool. And he said, okay, yeah. And he started hanging out with them online, and they played quite a bit. And one day, they were playing. It was starting to get late, and I think it was Isaac, and he said, "Hey, Thomas, we got to go. It's getting pretty late." And he said, "Really? What time is it where you are?" He says, "It's about 11 o'clock or something like that." He says, "Really? It's 11 o'clock where I am, too." He says, "Where are you?" He says, "Denver." "We are, too." So they're in the same town. So they arranged on one of these GameStop nights at midnight to meet. And they met and became great friends and converted Thomas. Thomas is now a member at the Brighton Church of Christ. And Isaac and Caleb are now off to college, and Thomas still comes. He brought somebody else, and he was baptized and has become a Christian. So as I say all these things, I'm not saying all of us switch off, pull the plug on everything. There are good things that can be used. God will use talents and the way that we go. We just need to be in control of it. But I think that's a wonderful story of how, they would have never met. They would have never met. And because they had their integrity online, even that is where the light was shining for them. And Thomas, his life will never be the same because of that.
I was just going to say that, we blame technology. I don't. We blame technology a lot on, the way our kids are. But we have to understand those of us with white hair or little hair or just a little white hair, some of us, we're responsible for that because we've raised a generation of that.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that, just like Barry was saying with the teachers, kids now learn differently than we learn. That's the way they're wired. That's the way they learn because of the generation. So sometimes teaching the Bible, sometimes getting in touch with them through technology with the youth group is the way to go. And not necessarily that that's a bad thing, because as an educator, that, when we were raised, we did the worksheets.
Right.
Rote memorization, those kind of things. And educators now are trying to encourage critical analysis and deeper thinking to try to be a deeper thinker. So with that technology, there's also some positive aspects of that.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I totally agree with you. I think sometimes we need to say, yes, I'm going to kind of get your attention with this lesser level, but we need to pull you towards the critical thinking, and that's going to require you to actually pick up a book or something. So, yeah, I see exactly what you're saying.
Just being at a school that has iPads and everything, I think one of the things that I see, the most discipline problems that we have with kids, with things that shouldn't be on their iPads or going to things that they shouldn't be, is parents that disconnect from that. And one of the biggest ways to disconnect from your kids is to be anti-technology, because the parents that encourage it and learn from it, and that's not to say that they let their kids play games all the time or anything like that, but just that the parents understand it and they encourage the kids with it, we have no issues with. And we have kids that have been terrible grades-wise that are now excited about learning in the classroom and things because of this technology. But the parents that don't embrace that, you can see the disconnect there.
And I would compare it to the father who's willing to sit down and play dolls with his daughter. That same father may need to play Pokemon with his sons. You know, it's not, technology is kind of the side issue. It's that you care about your children. What are you interested in, you know, and to be involved. So I see exactly what you're saying. Great feedback and comments. I have a couple more things to say, but I don't want to. You also touched on something as far as using technology, as far as outreach. I think we need to be careful about degrading the message. A lot of people sum up their beliefs in a bumper sticker, you know, or sometimes I think the T-shirts can end up being a little disrespectful sometimes. That's my opinion. In playing by the advertising in that arena, I think sometimes the message can be degraded if we're not careful. That's one thought I had earlier when you mentioned that. Yeah.
Recommendation. You had mentioned briefly earlier on the parental guidance or recommendations, you know, and kind of how we just bypass those. Those are also on games, on movies.
Right.
And I know as a parent of teenagers, there's pressure to, you know, they're 13 and it says PG-14 on the game, you know. And there's been times where I've given into that, and then there's other times where I've thought, hold it. I'm saying it's okay, but the world who is really messed up is saying, no, it needs to be 13 or young, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And we sometimes we give in where we shouldn't, you know, we feel like we need to because other kids are, and there's been times where we've drawn that line and found out, oh yeah, so-and-so's parents did too, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting how quickly we let the world set the standards. You know, we might say, okay, I'm not going to see anything more than PG-13, you know, and R, and we have those standards. But then we'll watch television shows that I think in some ways are more dangerous because they're so subtle. They don't have the bad language or the violence, but they're teaching a casual disregard for sin.
Like most movies now are like rated R and stuff, and there's not like many PG movies and stuff for like little kids to watch.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I know we're over time, but you're touching on some things that I really think about a lot. That, you know, a lot of writing today in the entertainment world is all about shock. It's not good writing. They have to resort. I had a teacher who said it's not strong language; it's weak language. You know people, if they cuss a lot, it's usually because they're not very clever. They have to use shock to do that, and comedians do that in movies and television because there's really not much cleverness or talent there, and they have to resort to those tactics. Okay, we'll talk more, especially the last class tomorrow will be probably hopefully this kind of format, and I want to hear something you have to say, but I know I've stepped on your toes, and now I'm going to make you more mad because I'm going to give you some homework. All right, and actually it's kind of an experiment. Here's some things, if you want, you can try. You're the guinea pigs. Here's some things to try that might reveal some things about all of us. Between now and tomorrow, try one of these things. Eat dinner at the table. If you can clear off the table of all the stuff that's... see, I know. That's my... On the way home, stay in one lane the whole way there. Say, you're probably thinking, just make us write an essay, anything. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man. Okay, I didn't have to be specific. Okay. Go to the grocery store and get in the longest line. Yeah. I'll go ahead and tell you now, I may mention it again later. I told this to somebody, and they tried that, and they said, okay, let's do it. And they went there, and somebody came up and waved them over and says, no, we can get you right here. And they could not get in the long line. They moved them on through. No, you have to do them all. Oh, yeah, that's for sure. Okay, wash the dishes by hand with someone in your family. Might be, how about a dish maybe? Or fold up the fast food wrappers together or something. Watch TV. I mean, watch it. Next time you turn it on, maybe look for some things that you didn't notice before. Or don't watch TV while you're going to sleep. That'd be kind of disconcerting to a lot of people. Here's the tough one. I saved the toughest one for last, right? I know. Here's the toughest one for last. Don't check your email after 8 o'clock. Anyway, these are just suggestions. Yeah, everything. Yeah. Disconnect. Don't check anything. Can I ask my friend to check my email? Yeah, that's right. All right. All right, we're out of time. Yeah, what's that? Yeah, I talked to them to their face, and then they can check it for me. All right, I really appreciate your attention. I know, like I say, it's pretty amazing that you took the time to be here. I know it's very, very busy, but I appreciate being here, and I appreciate the opportunity. Let's go ahead and close with a prayer, unless there's anything else to go over.
Tomorrow at 9 o'clock for Bible class, 10 for worship, 1 for the afternoon. We will have some coffee and donuts and juice in the morning again at about 8:30 in the big fellowship hall in the morning. If you're coming to help to serve the meal tomorrow, we have an 8 o'clock early service for the meal workers. And of course, we'll have a late service tomorrow evening for anyone that couldn't be here in the morning as well. But Bret's going to speak 9, 10, and 1 tomorrow before he flies back home. Yeah. Thank you, Chuck. If you're visiting with us today or if you have some health problems, just totally disregard what I'm about to say. But if some of you healthy guys and or ladies could stay around for a little while and help us get the fellowship hall set up for the meal for tomorrow, we'd really appreciate that. Phil has already done some preliminary work down there, but we need as much help as possible. And I think in 15 or 20 minutes, 20 or so of us could probably get this done. Sorry, done? Totally disregard what I just said then. Nothing else needs to be done.